We're going to get started here very shortly. We're just waiting for our attendees list to populate, so let's give it a couple more seconds. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jay McLean, and I'm one of the board of directors with OMRA. I'm also the chair of its education committee. I work as an HR manager with the City of Niagara Falls. On behalf of our board of directors, I want to thank you for joining us today in our latest OMRA webinar series during the COVID pandemic. Today we have a special guest. I'd like to welcome Rachel Mitchell of Ergo Professional Ergonomic Injury Management and Safety Services. She's going to be talking about the topic of returning to work after COVID-19 and discussing some of the ergonomic considerations. She'll also be talking to us about how to prepare the physical workplace, as well as ensure the physical and mental well-being of employees as they return to work. Rachel's a Canadian certified professional ergonomist and a certified kinesiologist. She works with clients in a wide range of sectors and environments, including manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, construction, public utility, and office workplaces as well. Rachel has provided return to work coordination for clients attending WSIB specialty programs and has successfully assisted clients with extended work absences, chronic pain, and work-related PTSD. Her experience includes completing detailed ergonomic analysis, physical demands analysis, office assessments, ergonomic program development and evaluation, return to work assessments, ergonomics integration into engineering designs, as well as delivering physical and cognitive ergonomics training programs. In addition to her work with Ergo, Rachel is the current president of the board of the Canadian College for the Certification of Professional Ergonomics. We're delighted to have Rachel with us today. Ergo has long been a strong supporter of OMRA, so we thank them for that, as that partnership is very much appreciated with OMRA and our board of directors. And with that, Rachel, I'd like to turn it over to you.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jay. So I thought we'd spend some time today talking about the ergonomics and human factors related challenges and opportunities associated with the return to work that's happening kind of following what for many has been a COVID hiatus from work, and what kinds of things we should be doing to prepare and prevent injury, and how ergonomics can look to mitigate some of those risks. So as Jason mentioned, I'm a Canadian certified professional ergonomist. I've been in the field for over 18 years, and I'm the managing ergonomist for Ergo Inc. Ergo Inc. is an ergonomics consulting company based out of the Richmond Hill area, covering the GTA, but with associates sort of spread throughout the province, and has been in business for 25 years, providing ergonomic services to both industrial, manufacturing, and office environments. So let's look at where we're heading today. So I want to talk just briefly about kind of where we are now, the situation we find ourselves in, and then as employees begin to return to work in larger numbers, I want to look at some of the physical changes to health that we might expect to see from our employees, the physical changes that they're facing in the environment, and as well as the psychosocial implications of all of these things that have really changed drastically over the last 3 months. And then we're going to finish it up today by talking about the role of ergonomics, what ergonomics can do to help mitigate some of these risks. So as we all know, non-essential businesses have been closed since mid-March. And things are gradually reopening. I know everyone's busy going to, at least in the GTA, get their haircut tomorrow. I believe tomorrow is the day that those things start to reopen. So, you know, over the last week or two, we've started to see much more sort of reopening, many more people who were not in the workplace returning to work. People who are going to work will notice that the commuting traffic has increased substantially over the last kind of couple of weeks as well. And what we're facing is a workforce that for the most part has either been out of work for a number of months or maybe has been working reduced hours, with a much smaller subset of people who have actually been working kind of throughout this entire time and may actually have been working, you know, longer hours or with sort of more challenges if they were continuing to be in the workplace. But we're going to for now assume that we've got a lot of folks who have been out of work or at least out of the workplace. for the last several months. We've got employees who have been socially separated from work, from their families, from all kinds of outlets, whether they're fitness outlets, stress relieving outlets. And then I think it's fair to say that we've got a population that's going to be quite stressed, or is quite stressed, about a number of things: their health, the health and well-being of their families, their finances, the future of their work. And so all of these things are sort of being carried with these employees as they start to return to work. So we've got folks who've had reduced access to a lot of different outlets over the last 3 months or so. So people who have reduced access to their fitness outlets. So whether it was, trails being closed initially, no access to gyms, people who are on sports teams or do athletic activities that have all been closed. And as a result of that, we've got employees who may now be deconditioned, who've lost sort of physical strength and physical ability as they start to return to work. We've got people who have had reduced access to their family, and their families may be their social outlets. Their families may be providing them with personal support, with mental health support. And so there are implications there for people's mental well-being. And then we also know that people have had reduced access to their healthcare providers, even though those things have continued to be open. So people may not have been visiting their family doctors as much as they normally would have for help. Places like massage therapy, OT, PT, those have been closed. People may not have had access to psychologists or other therapists that they might have been working with. Some of you may have heard where I'm located, I'm hearing ads on the radio from Heart and Stroke Foundation warning people to please seek help if they have signs and symptoms of stroke. Obviously, people are not attending the emergency room for potentially life-threatening issues because of that fear of exposure, both kind of out in the world in general, but in particular in hospital settings. There's much more kind of apprehension about attending those settings. And so we have folks who may have other complicating health issues that have not been dealt with that are going to be returning with those folks to work. So let's look at first those physical changes that we might expect for our workforce. So with an absence from physical outlets like gyms, and also people who have not been performing physical work if they are in kind of physical jobs, we can expect that these employees will have suffered a loss of muscle mass. So with time, if we are not exposing ourselves to those same levels of physical activity, muscle over time is replaced with fat. We start to see an increase in fatigue because of that loss of muscle mass, and we also see a reduce in strength. So there is a 1 to 3% loss in muscle strength per day when you kind of halt that physical activity. And that loss starts to become really apparent in people's sort of overall strength after that first 3 weeks. And so what we would expect is that as employees, especially those in physical jobs with material handling, people who have jobs with lots of pushing and pulling and carrying and lifting, that those folks are going to have increased fatigue, and they're going to have sort of less endurance with these types of physical tasks. So, we can imagine people in maintenance type jobs, people in public works, are the folks we need to really be thinking about with respect to these kinds of losses in strength. The other is that we would also expect to see losses in cardiovascular fitness. So as we lose our cardiovascular fitness, the heart is able to pump less blood with each beat. And so over time, what happens is the heart rate starts to increase. So in the first 3 weeks that people might have been out of work and not attending the gym, we're going to see increases in heart rates, from between 4 and 15 beats a minute, that it's going to go up. And after 3 weeks, that does plateau. So it doesn't continue, but there is an initial change there. And that's going to have some significant impacts on the heart's efficiency, the efficiency to pump oxygen to the muscles in the body, and again, for fatigue and for endurance for our employees. Now, some other changes as a result of some of the inactivity might include less range of motion, more joint stiffness, more pain, and what is now being referred to as the quarantine 15 or the COVID-19, which is a increase in waistline as a result of lack of activity and maybe a little more sitting on the couch, eating snacks and opening a bottle of wine during the week. So those weight gain changes do have an implication for our health as well. If you consider simply the activity of sort of bending forward to pick something up off the ground, when you bend forward, half your body weight is above your waist. So as soon as you do that motion, your low back muscles have to support half of your body weight. And as your body weight goes up, your back muscles are working harder in order to support you. So if you have a job where you're regularly bending over, to do low level work or pick things up off the ground, boxes, landscaping tasks, then that's going to have an increase in low back muscle activity. And the other is that when you're carrying items, if you do have some girth in front of you, you can't hold those boxes, those containers as close to the body, and we increase the leverage and the loading on the low back. So there's some sort of unintended consequences above and beyond discovering that your jeans don't fit anymore. The other thing that we need to consider is that we have employees who may be suffering more discomfort even before they set foot back into a workplace. So in particular, I'm thinking about the staff who've been working at home for the last 3 months, people who we know have been sitting on their dining room chairs, are working only off of a laptop, really have non-ideal office workstations, and may already be experiencing the onset of some musculoskeletal disorders from these non-optimal workstations. I do have kind of a personal theory here that I think physiotherapists and massage therapists will probably do really great business in the later half of this year, because I do think that these are the types of injuries that we're really going to start to see as a result of people working in these sort of makeshift home offices. So the inevitable kind of implication for work here is that we've got employees who are returning to work who have less endurance, who have less strength, and who are going to fatigue more quickly. And so effectively, people have a reduced physical capacity to do work. So if you think about, someone doing a really physical job pre-COVID-19, let's say, for instance, that somebody was working at 50% of their physical capacity, right? We assume people are not working, at 100% of their strength levels when they're at work. Maybe they're working at 50% of their strength levels. If that has decreased over this hiatus from work, as these employees return to work, they may now be working at 60% of their strength capabilities. And so there's a smaller buffer for safety here because people are working at a higher percentage of their capacity. So we may see injuries that result from that. The other is that people may have difficulty keeping up with work. They may not be able to maintain the productivity levels, again, because of losses of endurance as they return to work. And I think we have the potential that employees may be returning to work with discomfort, with injuries, even prior to setting foot in the workplace. Even if you think about people who maybe were attending physiotherapy prior to COVID and then were unable to attend for the last 12 weeks, there's only so much that an unprogressed home exercise program might do for you. And so those folks may have had setbacks as well if they had pre-existing conditions before this all went down. So let's look at some of the changes in the workplace, because we're looking at sort of how this is going to impact both the people who are returning to work and the way in which we do work when our employees return, because there's sort of a combination of factors that need to be considered here. So as we all know, we are returning to workplaces that are going to have all kinds of additional social distancing requirements. So the inevitable change that happens with social distancing is now we have jobs where people may be walking more over the course of the day. People may be carrying things more. If people are not working right next to the person they used to work with, they're going to have to, carry a box or a container or a tote or something over to somebody who is now further away from them. So there are, increased demands in terms of that. And as a result of the additional time that goes into walking and carrying and covering those additional distances, employees may feel that they have to work faster in order to keep up with production rate. We're effectively adding non-value added time to some of these work tasks. We're adding more physical demands into these work tasks. So work tasks are physically going to be more challenging, and employees have a reduced capacity to do that. So those two things go together to create an increased risk of injury. The other is that if we look at workplaces that may have implemented physical barriers, in particular, I'm imagining reception desks, cashier type roles. If we separate those folks from the people that they are serving, then there is the potential that we are increasing reach distances. So I've now got to stretch further to pass a, interact transfer through a glass window for someone to be able to complete a transaction. And all of that kind of reaching and extending out beyond a barrier has potential for creating some shoulder discomfort, some back discomfort, and more demands from that perspective. The other thing that's maybe happening in the workplace is that we may be dealing with a decreased workforce as people begin to return to work. So we know that there have been layoffs, and so the workforce may just physically be smaller to start with. There may also just be less people in an environment at any given time, in part because of our attempts to increase social distancing. Maybe we're staggering shifts, so there's less crossover between people, between shifts. We may have some people who continue to work at home. And as a result of there being less people in the work environment, there is the potential that we are increasing workload for those who are in an environment at any given time. And then we've got to consider kind of what these implications are going to be for people who do continue to work from home in the long term, and what the implications are if we leave them in these sort of makeshift home office, dining room table workstations for extended periods of time. So with that increase for potential workload, because there are less folks at work to start with, and then you add that on top of more walking, more carrying, potentially additional cleaning duties that maybe were not part of a job prior to COVID-19, that we are just overall increasing the workload on staff, which does increase the potential for injury. So the next thing to give some consideration to is what the implications of the wearing of facial masks is for the workforce. So there are people who are going to perceive wearing of face shields to make work more difficult. So people tend to feel like, it's more difficult to do work. That is in part because it is warmer, and there is a little bit of a sort of mental piece to get around in terms of, whether it feels more laborious to breathe when there's a mask on while you're getting used to that. I do think that that is going to dissipate over time, but there's definitely going to be an initial period where people feel that work is more difficult to do while they're wearing masks. And there's all kinds of communication challenges associated with the wearing of masks. So I do have a client where I have returned to work with them. They are all wearing masks, mandatory at all times. So I'm wearing a mask 8 hours a day in a manufacturing environment that last week was 35 degrees indoors. So, that does make things a lot more challenging. And the nature of my job is that I ask a lot of questions about, what people are doing and why they're doing it and how they do their job. And so I spend a lot of my day talking. And I do find that after 8 hours of wearing a mask in combination with also wearing earplugs in an environment that's 90 decibels, that my throat really hurts because I find myself screaming to be heard over the noise, the earplugs, and the mask. So I think it's important to recognize the kind of environment that your staff are returning to. And if you are doing masks in combination with high volumes of noise and earplugs, you do need to give some thought to how people are going to communicate and how difficult it may be for folks to hear each other over the mask and the sort of, screaming that people feel like they need to do while wearing masks. It's also unbelievable how much you realize that you use lip reading, especially to communicate with people you don't know well, because once the masks are on, it does become more difficult to understand people on kind of on top of everything else. And the other is that, you know, there has been a study of the implication of glove use in ergonomics for years. So this has always been a sort of topic of interest for ergonomists. We know that as employees start wearing gloves in a job, that it reduces their tactile sensation, their tactile feedback. And so there's a tendency when you're wearing gloves to grip tools and grip, you know, any kind of implement in the hand more tightly, because you can't tell because of that loss of tactile feedback, how tightly you're holding something. So what tends to happen is employees hold things more tightly. It increases the muscle use in the forearm. And so you get more fatigue in the hand with the glove. And this becomes more challenging the thicker the glove is, because obviously there's less feedback when you're dealing with thicker gloves. And the worse fitting the glove is, that increase in grip strength goes up even further. So we do need to make sure that if we are implementing gloves, that we have gloves available in all sizes. Don't forget your petite women, particularly in jobs that maybe are traditionally done by men. Sometimes it can be difficult to find the smaller sizes of gloves. And that also gloves are going to sort of impede people's, you know, dexterity and the range of motion of their fingers. It can be difficult for really fine motor, dexterous tasks as well. And then the last piece in terms of the physical changes to the environment is that we need to think through what the implications are going to be if you have jobs that have a lot of teamwork. So I sort of jump to mind to sort of jobs like public works, where there's a lot of, you know, two-person lifting tasks, there's a lot of teamwork, and that trade-off that happens in our decision-making about whether it is more dangerous to have people working together because it increases their physical contact with each other, versus the risk of having somebody perform a task alone, which may increase the physical demands and the risk of injury. So that's a really difficult balancing act, and we need to just make sure that when we make decisions to separate people for the purpose of social distancing, that we don't forget that there is then the potential that a task maybe used to be done with two people. One of the photos on here is a manual valve rotation, and I know when these valves stick, that two people tend to do this task together. And sort of then, you know, what would our expectation be? What direction are we going to give employees about how we expect them to perform that task, if we are also telling them to social distance at the same time? So we need to make sure we think through all of these scenarios and we give employees really clear instructions about what the expectations are about how these situations are handled. Okay, so I want to move on to sort of a more subtle sort of change in the work environment, and that's important. That is that I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there's so much more that's going on here above and beyond just the physical changes to folks and to their work environments. So there's a lot that's happening that are kind of psychosocial changes with a lot of implications for people's mental health in the workplace. And so, you know, before folks even return to work, if they continue to be off at this point in time, we know that employees are already dealing with issues of increased anxiety and mental stress. And that may be anxiety related to returning to work. When you have been out of the workplace for 12 weeks, you have been socially isolating at home, going out into the world feels or can feel very scary. If you haven't been doing that, if you've been going to work the whole time, then it seems like nothing, but we need to remember that folks who've been home for 12 weeks, that going out into a world where we've been told to sort of avoid can feel very dangerous to some people. And so there's an adjustment that happens there, and there can be a lot of anxiety around that process. There's also a lot of anxiety around, you know, financial stresses, parents trying to find a balance between getting work done and children being at home, having to, you know, increase your workload because you're also dropping off groceries for elderly parents, all of those kinds of things. So people are feeling stressed because they are juggling more than ever before. You know, when I hear these things on the news about people with all this like extra time on their hands, I can't help but wonder what kind of people these are. I don't know where all of their extra time comes from, because I think for many of us, things really do feel busier than ever before, with really work and home life getting very kind of mixed up together. We also have folks who are dealing with social isolation. So in particular, people who may already live alone, and going to work was their contact with the outside world. They are going to be isolated, and that has a huge impact on people's mental health and well-being. And I think there's a lot of fear around job loss, with sort of an uncertainty of how long this will go on, and whether or not there will be cutbacks in all sorts of different industries. And this is all before you even set foot back in the workplace the first time. Once employees do start to return to work, then there's all kinds of other things that start to happen. So I think that there's going to be some distraction that happens when people return to work. And that's going to be a function of a number of things. So those mental stressors that we've already talked about are going to be on people's minds as they return to work and try to figure out how to navigate things, getting used to a new work environment. Even just wearing a mask and that regular discomfort around your ears from wearing the mask can be distracting, you know, as you get used to it and return to work. One of the facilities that I do work with has had a large increase in the number of lacerations that has happened over the first couple of months, or the first month or so that they have been back to work. And I think this is just a function of both distraction that's happening, people's minds are elsewhere, and also the fact that people are out of practice. So there are many more errors that are going to be made at work, because people, again, are distracted, and people are out of practice from the jobs that maybe they used to be able to do with their eyes closed. So we need to keep in mind kind of that potential for increased errors, and you may need to put in place additional kind of error catching mechanisms in jobs where that's really critical. We've already sort of alluded to this issue of communication between coworkers. So because of the difficulty in communicating with a mask, you may find people are just much less likely to kind of have a more detailed discussion with their colleagues. They may just sort of say things in much fewer words. We may lose information if people are not communicating as thoroughly as they were before. And it's also, I think there's a lot of potential for tension between coworkers because of different risk tolerances. You know, you see people using their masks more religiously than others. I know in facilities that I'm going into where masks are mandatory, I mean, it is very clear that some people are taking it much more seriously than others. You've got people who've got it, you know, with their noses not covered by the mask. People who are wearing bandanas really loosely so they can say they're wearing a face covering, but maybe you're not. You know, it doesn't take much more than a trip to the grocery store to really highlight the fact that we've got people who really just are in completely different places in their perspective of risk tolerance. And so, you know, you have to think about, you know, if you've got younger employees who are very concerned, who maybe live with elderly parents, and they have a supervisor who maybe is less concerned and maybe is not wearing a mask, you know, is that employee going to be comfortable saying to their supervisor, you know, while we're having this discussion, can you please pull your mask back on? I know that at least twice a day, if I'm out working, I am reminding somebody that I'm having a conversation with that I would prefer that they keep their mask on while we're talking. So it is just a natural instinct that people pull it down in order to talk to somebody else, but it sort of defeats the purpose of the mask in the first place. And it's going to be difficult for some employees to speak up and kind of express any concerns that they may have. So we do need to be prepared that these things are going to have an implication on the potential risk of injury in musculoskeletal disorders. They're going to have an implication on potential errors that are made at work, and also for quality issues, right? I think the errors and quality issues are going to kind of go hand in hand. So let's just spend a little bit of time looking at, you know, what employers can do to prepare, or, you know, even if you do have employees that are starting to return to work, you know, it is not too late to take a step back and look at, are there any other things that we can put in place to make sure that we are providing employees with all of the information that they need, that we are making sure we educate people, that we ensure we've put everything into place that we can in order to protect people's, health and well-being. I think that health and safety has become very focused on, masks and hand sanitizer, and we need to remember that there is so much more to protecting our employees' health and well-being than to just that. And we need to kind of come back to some of these ergonomic principles. So for employees who are returning to work, it is important to make sure, obviously, that any new work procedures have been reviewed, that they understand what the expectations are in terms of any kind of COVID-19 safety measures, that employees are given education on how to perform cleaning tasks. If we have introduced new cleaning tasks, we have new cleaning chemicals that have come in the building, are those cleaning chemicals coming in 50-pound, containers, or do we all of a sudden have all kinds of lifting of boxes of cleaning materials that are coming into the facility that maybe we did not have in the past? And so there could be some new ergonomic risks associated with kind of handling of these products, maybe in a receiving area or something like that. So we need to consider whether there are ergonomic risks associated with any of these new tasks and the way in which we are asking people to clean with them. Are we asking people to clean, overhead? Do they need extended reach tools? All of those kinds of things. And then I think that we can go a long way to alleviate people's concern and anxiety with respect to return to work by making sure that we are providing them with education, that we are very clear about what the expectations are, and that we are doing adequate screening so that employees feel safe returning to the workplace. Now is the time more than ever to promote health and well-being in your facility. It is the time to have an open door policy to make sure that employees know that they can come forward, that they can express concerns, whatever those concerns are, that they know that you are there for them, and that we are kind of welcoming to any questions and concerns. I think it's also a really important time to make sure that we are encouraging reasonable working hours and boundaries between work and home life. This is particularly important for people who are working from home. I think that when you work from home and you are not accustomed to doing so, it becomes so much easier for work to bleed into your own personal time. And so you lose this boundary between what is work time and what is personal time. And I know that for people who are working and have their children at home, there are hours that get lost in the middle of the day as you help your children with their grade 3 French homework, or you go upstairs to break up fights between them, or whatever it is that's happening in your household. And so there's sort of this automatic thing that we all do, which is like, oh, I lost a couple of hours in the middle of the day today, so I'm now going to make up those hours in the evening. And I have been hearing stories from lots of people who are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning in order to get 2 hours of work done before their children wake up, and they are still working at 10 or 11 o'clock at night in order to, quote unquote, make up this time that they're losing. And I would estimate that these folks are now, well beyond their traditional 35 or 40-hour work weeks in doing this. So in an attempt to make up time, they've really kind of bypassed the need to do that, or sort of overshot the goal. And so we need to make sure that people are maintaining balance. Otherwise, our employees are going to burn out, and we're going to be dealing kind of with more issues as time continues to progress. This Friday is the last day of school, and so those of us who have had some reprieve because our children are busy doing homework may be less busy doing homework and may need parents more kind of in the weeks to come. And so again, that ability to balance and making sure that employees know sort of what the expectations are, and that we are encouraging them to maintain some good and safe, reasonable balances. And then we need to make sure that we make our employees aware. Now is a great time to remind people of, if you've got a nurse on site, they can consult, an employee assistance program, any of those kinds of things. All right, so moving on, one of the other things that I think, we can do at this point in time is draw upon our knowledge of graduated return to work. So, we have all been implementing graduated return to work principles for years. So we use those when people are off on WSIB for extended period of time or non-OC, and then return to work. We do these graduated return to work plans, recognizing that people need time to work, harden, and build strength and build endurance and build skill as they return to work. And so we should be dealing with some of our employees in exactly the same way. They have been off work, maybe not for an injury, but they have been off work for an extended period of time, and we need to allow them time to work, harden, and build skill. And so you may want to consider, if you've got quotas or production standards or whatever the case may be, giving it some time, building in kind of a graduated plan to allow employees to work their way back up to that 100% production rate and not have that expectation in place on day one, so that we are not setting people up to fail, and so that we are not setting people up to try to rush through their tasks, again, potentially increasing the risk of injury if we are doing that. I think that this work hardening is, if we're looking at kind of who we need to do that for, in particular, we need to think about doing that for employees who are in our most physically and most cognitively taxing jobs, because they're the ones that are likely going to struggle the most with that return to work. So sort of in relation to that, now is the time with changes in staffing for us to review work and workload expectations. So, if you have reduced staffing, production standards may not be possible anymore. Workloads may shift from one staff member to another, depending on who is working from home and who is on site. And so it's the time to kind of take a look at those workloads again. Employees are going to continue to need availability of flexible hours in order to manage both work and home environments. We need to make sure that we have built in whatever time a task needs if social distancing has increased the time required to perform a task. And we need to build in additional time for cleaning if that is an expectation of a job role as well. And this really just all comes down to the fact that we are going to need to reprioritize what the most important tasks are for our employees, so that they can do, those tasks that are most important, and then maybe some of those other tasks wait until we're able to kind of ramp work back up. We want to make sure that employees are not skipping breaks. So in the rush to feel like they need to get things done, there is a tendency sometimes to start skipping breaks and start skipping lunches. And so we need to make sure with this return to work, with these losses in capacity for work that have happened, with people being at home for 12 weeks, that people are taking their breaks, that people are taking their lunches. We may want to encourage, if you've got a stretching program in place, if you've got those computer systems that remind people, office workers, to get up from their desk and move around, now is the time to kind of pull those things back out and reinforce the importance of those types of things. I think we need to be really cautious about things like overtime right now. Again, our employees have reduced capacity, and so going from not working at all to extended overtime shifts does present some risk. And I would again sort of halt that overtime until you can sort of get a bit of a graduated work hardening into place, and then implement overtime after that has happened. Job rotation is something that ergonomics has often relied on, where we don't have good immediate engineering solutions. We may rotate people through tasks in order to limit exposure, but we need to keep in mind that job rotation also then increases the number of people who might be in contact with a particular type of equipment or tools. And so you are potentially increasing people's contact if you do continue with job rotation. So if you are involved in job rotation, then keep in mind that there may need to be a cleaning or a wipe down that happens before people rotate into another job or into another position. And many facilities that I'm in now have shifted their work shift times or are ending shifts 15 minutes early to make sure that a day shift can get out and out through the change room and out of the parking lot before an afternoon shift comes in, so that you're minimizing the number of people that are potentially in a change room or a lunch room at the same time. You may only need to have, a leader, a team leader, a supervisor who's there in order to transfer information that is required to go from one shift to another. You don't necessarily need all of the employees there for a shift handover meeting. For our employees who are continuing to work at home and who may continue to work at home, I'm hearing lots of people saying, they expect that they're off until September. We need to look at how we are going to provide education to employees on how to set up a home office. And we need to put into place ways for employees to take chairs and computer peripherals home. I personally think that our office employees are going to be the employees where we see the largest increase in injuries and discomfort. So traditionally, our injuries tend to come out of our most physically demanding jobs. I think because of the nature of office work and the challenges associated with the kitchen or dining room table, my personal prediction is that this is where our largest increase in injuries is going to come from. And I think there's so much that we can do with very little sort of resources and time and effort in order to get information, because you can provide all of these employees with the same information, through a single email or through a single webinar. So I think that we can have a really large impact on these staff. The only thing that I would say with respect to, taking equipment home is that an office chair is heavier than you might expect. And so I do think we just need to take a moment to consider, if you're having employees lift their chairs into their own trunks, that inevitably somebody's going to hurt their back doing that. And so you may need people to encourage people to come with a partner if they're picking up their chairs, to lift them into the trunk of their car, because they can be difficult to move. But I do know facilities that have set up sign-up procedures so people can take their secondary monitors home. They can take their keyboard, their mouse, their footrests, their chairs. The alternative is that we start providing people with some kind of allowance in order to allow them to purchase some of this equipment for home. The challenge is that an office chair is not an inexpensive piece of equipment, and so someone could quite easily blow through their budget and still not end up with a fantastic chair. And if they're sitting unused, I think the resources are much better spent finding a way to allow people to take that equipment home with them. So, don't assume that people know what to do with their home office. Most people are working from laptops. And so when you're sitting at your computer with a laptop, the screen is very low. And so the taller you are, the worse the situation gets. And so people are working with their heads really bent forward, looking down at these really low screens. And so, upper shoulder and neck discomfort is something that we're really going to see. Low back discomfort from dining room chairs. So think about, how you go about providing this information. Do you have some kind of tip sheet you can send out to employees by email? Do you have a webinar? We've been creating for a number of our employees a 45-minute how to set up a home office webinar that they put on their intranet, and then everybody gets access to it. It does not need to be a buy all new equipment webinar. You focus these things on, how do you pick the best chair from your kitchen chair and your dining room chair, and how do you roll up a towel to put in the low back. And if you're really petite and your kitchen table is way too high, this is how you turn your ironing board into a height adjustable desk, because in fact your ironing board is maybe the only height adjustable surface you've got in your house. So there's a lot of stuff that can easily be done with the equipment that's already in a house. And so we need to give people, at least as a starting point, some recommendations on what to do with what they already have, and then sort of take on that secondary stage of how do we get them something better if they're going to be there till September. So this particular poster here is from the msdprevention.com website, which has lots of really great resources. We have some office setup workstation images and posters that you can pull off of our website at orgoconsulting.ca as well if you're looking for something there. So this is by all means not something you need to recreate. There's tons of resources out there that you can get your whole hands on and send out to your employees. The other thing that I think we need to do, recognizing that people may have been socially isolated, is that we really do make a bit more of an effort to promote a sense of team, that we have video meetings. It's amazing how much more you can accomplish through a video meeting or even just a phone call than you can from 15 emails that go back and forth. So I think it's a better use of time, and I think it is really nice these days to see a familiar face and be able to have kind of a regular check-in. So make sure that those things are happening regularly and that you've got the technology, the resources available to allow your staff to have contact with their colleagues. And then I think the last thing that we really need to do is revisit an ergonomics program. So go back, look at your ergonomics program. What do you already have in place that you can roll out again, that you can remind people about? And where there may be gaps that need to be filled in. So, now is the time to encourage employees to bring forward concerns, to report discomfort. I am concerned that employees who may be concerned about their jobs in the long term may be more reluctant to come forward with discomfort. So I don't know whether we're going to see a bit of a lapse in reporting of injuries in the current climate, but I do think that is a possibility. So make sure we are encouraging people, you want to know about that discomfort as early as possible because it's so much easier to fix. If someone lets you know when they're having difficulties early on than when they're way down the road and that muscle damage has already been done. And then I think we need to start looking at, how do we come up with solutions to decrease the physical and cognitive demands associated in particular with our more physically and more cognitively taxing jobs at a time when we know employees have reduced capability of doing these types of work. So just a couple things with respect to, how ergonomics can help with this, and then I'll leave some time for questions. So, now is the time to assess your high capacity work tasks and to make improvements. So whether these are your fastest paced tasks, your most fatiguing tasks, tasks with a lot of pushing and pulling and lifting, tasks with a lot of repetition. These are the jobs that we need to look at and figure out how we minimize those demands. If you, recall back to, introductory to ergonomics, the risk in ergonomics for a musculoskeletal disorder comes from a combination of force, frequency, and posture. So any one of these risk factors on its own can cause injury. So working in a poor posture, doing something repetitively or something that is high force on its own can create injury. But we are most concerned about tasks in which those risk factors act in combination with each other. So the simplest example is that most folks could lift a 20-pound box once, no problem. But if I ask you to lift a 20-pound box 20 times in a row, the risk of injury goes up. And if I ask you to lift it 20 times in a row over your head, the risk has gone up that much more because now I've got risk factors working in combination and kind of compounding each other. So we need to look at some of these jobs and identify, where are the risk factors with the existing tasks, and are any of these risk factors made worse by social distancing? Are they made worse by any sort of new protocols, new methodology, reductions in workforce that have happened in any of these tasks? And when you're looking at finding ways to identify hazards, again, please don't recreate the wheel. There's so many kinds of hazard screening tools that are available. I mentioned the msdprevention.com website. We have a whole bunch on our website as well. There's really simple checklists that you can use as a walkthrough. There are inspection sheets that are designed for a joint health and safety committee who's already doing a safety walkthrough to kind of add an ergonomics screen onto those kinds of things. So use what you can, take the time, review some of these tasks and identify if there are hazards present. And don't forget to consider the potential risk factors that have arisen from any new infection control tasks or methodology that you have put into place, and then prioritize these for making some changes. I think that, you know, at a time where reduced contact is really important, we're going to have to look at engineering solutions much more than some of the administrative controls. So where in the past we might have relied on two-person lifting strategies or job rotation, now might be a time for us to reconsider, you know, what might have been a longer term plan for, you know, how do we put an engineering control into place so that we don't have to lift this thing, you know, manually at all, and we can reduce that risk directly at the source. We also want to take the time, if jobs have changed, so if the expectations of a job have changed, then your PDAs, your CDAs, your physical demands assessments, your cognitive demands assessments may be out of date. If there are new procedures, and so you may need to update that documentation to reflect the new demands. And it is also a really good time to identify where there are non-value added tasks. So we talked about at the beginning, you know, additional walking, additional carrying. Are there places that we can get rid of some of that non-value added work to make sure that there is sufficient time available to do those more critical tasks and to ensure that employees are taking the time to do those things properly? If there are things that you are redesigning because you have new requirements for reception desks and that type of place, particularly, you know, where you might be customer facing and dealing with the public, then ergonomics guidelines in theory, you know, can be used to evaluate potential changes to a workstation design and a layout. So you can take a look and figure out, you know, what does the time motion study say about this new workstation layout? How much longer is it going to take to perform this task? So we can set appropriate production rates, but we can also identify where, you know, increased distances and reaches might increase the risk of injury in a substantive way to the employees who are performing those jobs. And then, you know, the last is a time to kind of revisit what your ergonomics training looks like. So I do think one of the most important things that we should be considering at this point in time is how you train your staff who are staying at home. So, you know, it's important that we are providing some kind of webinar, coaching, information sheets, whatever the case may be, to your home office staff in order to ensure that they've set up their workstations correctly. But it's also a really good time to do refreshers for our employees who are returning to work. Refreshers on how to report injuries, how to report discomfort, how to report concerns, ergonomic risk factors. If you've got physically demanding tasks where you've identified best practices in order to minimize demands, you know, we want to make sure that we're reminding people of that. Again, especially because people may be out of practice for some of these tasks. And it is a time where it is important, or where we have had to get more creative in how we deliver training. So, you know, I do a lot of training as part of my job. I am now doing many more of them in this format with a webinar, but I'm also doing a lot of PowerPoints where I'm narrating over them, so that they're voice-over PowerPoints that can be loaded, you know, onto an internet and people can flip through them at their leisure. You know, it's a very difficult time to get a lot of people into a training room. You need a really big training room in order to socially distance people sufficiently to do in-person training. But that is also happening. So you may need to think about kind of what the best way to get some of this information out to your employees are. But likely over the last number of years, you've done a number of these things, and it's just time to kind of refresh and roll those things out again. You know, one of the things that we have been working on here, because we were deemed, you know, Ergo Inc. was deemed, our work was deemed non-essential at the beginning. So we were at home. And so we've actually redone a number of our webinar series. So if you're interested in a 4-part, which is a 4-hour refresher, either on ergonomics assessments, sort of for more, physical jobs, or you're looking for something more office-based, we now do have 2 updated webinar series that are available. And if you're looking for a home office webinar, a really short one you can roll out, please reach out to me. I have that easily available. So that is sort of the end of where I needed to tackle today. Hopefully that provides you with a good sense of, where those risks may be for your employees and some places that you can look to in order to implement some changes in order to minimize risk for your employees. And I'm happy to take questions via the chat box. While we're waiting for those to come in, I'll just flip to the next slide. So some resources if you're looking for anything. So as I mentioned, this is our website here. There is a resource section, so you can take a flip through, ergonomic screening checklists, office ergonomic setup posters, any of those kinds of things. And again, the Ontario MSD prevention site, which is www.msdprevention.com, is a great resource for things as well.
Rachel, have you been made aware of any WSIB claims from individuals working from home during the COVID pandemic?
I have not heard of any yet,
Yeah.
but we implemented virtual ergonomics assessments, back in March when this started, and I didn't get any calls. And over the last 2 or 3 weeks, people are starting to come out of the woodwork, and I think people have just sort of been suffering. I think there's been a real sense of not being sure how long this was going on. So I think employers back in March and April were like, oh, well, we might be back to work soon, so we won't do anything yet. And I think there's just sort of been this wait and see. And I think it's now clear that people are going to potentially be at their dining room tables for a lot longer. And so I'm getting mostly calls, not from employers, but from actual employees who are like, I don't know what to do, help, how do I figure out what to do, through personal contacts and things like that.
And the virtual assessment, I guess, is very similar to what you would do in person, but you're just kind of walking them through, I guess, I'm assuming you're assessing their setup at their home workstation?
Yeah, so a virtual assessment, usually what we ask someone to do is hopefully if they don't live alone, to have somebody take a picture of them at their desk taken from the side, so we can really kind of see what that workstation looks like. And then we do it via web. So we have a video conference and we just sort of talk them through how to adjust, the chair or walk us through the house to find the best chair we can, and do it in that manner. I do have one question that's come in here. So the 4-part, so I will clarify. So the 4-part webinar series on office ergonomics is not specific for home office. So it is a 4-part series. One's on chairs, one's on keyboards and mice, one's on monitors, and one's on sitting and standing. So it's 4 times 1 hour. It is pre-recorded, and it is available for purchase on our website. The 1-hour home office, how to set up your home office webinar, is also pre-recorded, and we provide that based, pricing for that is based on the number of employees that will have access to it on your intranet, but it is very inexpensive. We are just looking to sort of get it out there and cover our time to create it. So it's a very inexpensive way to go.
Excellent, that's great. Is there any more questions in the chat box?
That is the only one I had.
Okay, well listen, Rachel, I want to thank you very much for a very informative and insightful presentation. We appreciate the time and effort you put into preparing the presentation, as well as the time you took out of your day today to do this. So thanks again. We very much appreciate that. I also want to thank our AMRA members who are in attendance today. My fellow board members and I are very grateful for your ongoing support, especially of our association. As with previous webinars, today's session will be posted on the AMRA website under the members only section. It will be posted there for 1 week. So if you'd like to rewatch Rachel's presentation, or if you want to share it with an HR colleague, by all means, please do so. And with that, I'm going to close out today's webinar. So again, Rachel, thank you so much. Our AMRA members, thank you so much. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.